The tournament hall in Long Beach, California held 412 seats on the morning of October 14, 1979. Every one of them was filled before 9 in the morning. The bleachers ran 3 rows deep along the east wall, and the overflow crowd stood 3 and 4 people thick along the north corridor, pressed against the cinder block, arms folded, watching outside. The Santa Ana winds were moving through the parking lot in slow, dry gusts. Inside, the air was still and heavy with the particular smell of old canvas and floor wax that every serious martial artist in that room had known since childhood. The event was the Pacific Rim International Karate Championships. It was not the largest tournament on the circuit that year, but it carried weight. It carried weight because of who judged it. The judging panel had been assembled over the course of 4 months by the tournament director, a man named Gerald Foss, who had spent 22 years in competitive karate and another 9 administering it. Foss had wanted, for this particular event, a panel that could not be questioned. He had, for the most part, succeeded. The head judge seated at the center table that morning was a man named Alistair Drummond. He was 44 years old. He had trained in Okinawa for 3 years in his 20s, had earned his 7th dan in Shotokan under a lineage that went back to the post-war era, and had been certified by 3 separate international governing bodies as a senior competition official. He had judged at the Pan American Games. He had been cited twice in official correspondence from the World Karate Union for precision and consistency in scoring. He wore a dark blazer and had a habit of setting his pen down on the table between scores with the deliberateness of a man who understood that every gesture he made in that chair carried consequence. He was, in almost every technical sense, the most qualified person in that building. In the next 4 minutes, he was going to say something into a microphone that he could not take back. Nobody in that room understood yet what they were about to see. Not Drummond, not Foss, not the 412 people who had come for a tournament and were going to receive something older and harder to name than a tournament. They would carry what happened in that room for the rest of their lives, and they would not all agree on the details, but they would agree on one thing. They would agree on what it felt like to be in the room when it happened. If you want to know what Chuck Norris said when it was over, stay until the end. It was 3 words. It was the only thing he said the entire morning, and the man who heard it has not forgotten a syllable of it in 45 years. The Pacific Rim Championships ran 3 divisions before the Black Belt Open division began at 10:30. Alistair Drummond had been watching since the first match. He had scored 31 bouts by the time the Open division began. He had not made a single call that drew a formal protest. Gerald Foss, sitting 2 chairs to his right, had noted this privately with satisfaction. The morning had been, up to that point, unremarkable, competent, a tournament running the way a well-organized tournament runs, which is to say without visible seams. What changed the texture of the morning was not anything that happened on the mat. It was something Drummond saw from his chair at 10:30, 6 minutes before the Open division was scheduled to begin. He saw a man walk in through the side entrance near the equipment tables. The man was wearing a denim jacket over a plain white shirt. He was wearing jeans. He had on a pair of leather shoes, not training shoes, and he was carrying a paper cup of coffee from the concession area in the corridor. He appeared to be somewhere in his late 30s, perhaps 40. He was not tall. He was not broad. He had a beard that was beginning to show the first traces of gray at the edges, and he moved across the back of the room with the economy of a man who was not trying to be noticed. He found a seat in the 4th row from the back center section. He sat down. He removed the lid from his paper cup. He watched the mat. Drummond watched him for a moment. He consulted the official registration roster on the table in front of him. He did not find the man's name on it. He leaned left and asked his colleague, a senior judge named Haruki Sato, whether the competitor in the 4th row had registered late. Sato looked. Sato said he did not believe that man was a competitor. Drummond set his pen down. What happened next has been described differently by the 40 or so people who were positioned to see it clearly, and nearly identically by the 2 or 3 who were positioned best of all. What they agree on is this. At approximately 22 minutes past 10, Alistair Drummond rose from the center chair, walked to the official's microphone at the side of the scoring table, and asked in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall whether the unregistered individual seated in the fourth row center section was present in an official capacity. The hall went quiet the way halls go quiet when a sound arrives that does not match the register of the morning. The man in the denim jacket looked up from his coffee. He did not look startled. He did not look offended. He looked at the microphone, and then at the man standing behind it with the expression of someone who has just been asked a question he finds mildly interesting. Drummond spoke again. He said that the open division was about to commence. He said that the mat area was reserved for registered competitors and credentialed officials. He said that if the individual in the fourth row was neither, he would need to identify himself or relocate to the public seating along the north wall. There was a pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds. In the third row, directly in front of the man in the denim jacket, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who was scoring volunteer records for the tournament, set her clipboard down on her knee. In the east bleachers, a man named Ronald Chiang, who had won the lightweight division that morning and was watching the open division in his uniform, stopped talking to the man beside him mid-sentence. Gerald Foss, at the officials' table, placed both hands flat on the surface in front of him and did not move them. The man in the denim jacket took one more sip of his coffee. He set the cup on the floor beneath his seat. He looked at Drummond for a moment with no expression that anyone present was able to describe precisely afterward. Then he stood up. He did not stand up quickly. He stood up the way a man stands up when he has been sitting for a while and is in no particular hurry to be anywhere. He reached down, without looking, and picked up the denim jacket he had draped over the back of the chair. He folded it once, lengthwise along the center seam. He set it across the back of the empty seat beside him. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt. His arms were not remarkable to look at. He was, to anyone who did not already know, entirely unremarkable to look at. And then the wave started. It started in the front rows on the west side, where 3 men who had been competing on the national circuit for the better part of a decade were seated together. One of them said something to the other 2. The other 2 looked toward the fourth row. One of them stood up slightly from his seat, then sat back down. In the bleachers along the east wall, Ronald Chiang had stopped watching the mat entirely. He was looking at the fourth row, and the man standing beside him was now also looking, and the man beside that man was turning his head. It moved through the room the way a current moves through still water. Not a ripple, a current. Row by row, section by section, the hall's attention realigned itself from the mat to the fourth row center section, where a man in a white t-shirt and leather shoes was standing with a paper cup of coffee on the floor at his feet. Gerald Foss recognized him first among the officials. He recognized him and he reached out and placed his hand on Drummond's forearm, at the microphone. Drummond looked at him. Foss said something to him that no one at a distance could hear. Whatever it was, Drummond's expression changed. Not dramatically, but it changed. He had already lost. He simply did not know it yet. Before we go further, if you have watched this channel for any time at all, you know what comes next is not going to be quick. And it is not going to be simple. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. What happens in the next few minutes on that mat will take some time to explain properly, because what looked like 4 minutes of movement was, for every person in that room, something they would be unpacking for years. The man in the white t-shirt walked to the edge of the mat. He did not walk quickly. He did not look at Drummond. He walked to the edge of the mat and he stopped there, just at the boundary, and he stood with his hands at his sides and he waited. Gerald Foss had by now left the official's table and was walking toward him. Foss reached him and shook his hand with both of his own. The exchange between them lasted roughly 20 seconds, after which Foss turned and walked back to the table. He picked up the microphone. He said, in a voice that was slightly less steady than it had been all morning, that he would like to introduce a guest of the tournament, a former world professional middleweight karate champion, a man who had held that title for 6 consecutive years, a man who had compiled a professional competition record of 183 wins. He said the name. The hall did not erupt. It did something more unusual than erupt. It produced a sound that is difficult to describe to anyone who was not in it. Something between a held breath and the beginning of a sound that no one wanted to be the first to make alone. And then someone in the east bleachers started clapping, and within 4 seconds the entire hall had joined. And it was not applause so much as it was 412 people processing the fact that they had all been looking at Chuck Norris for the last 3 minutes without knowing it. Alistair Drummond was still standing at the side of the officials' table. He had by this point understood several things in rapid succession. He understood who the man was. He understood what he had said into the microphone. He understood that everyone in the building had heard it. He was 44 years old and he had spent 22 years in competitive karate, and he was standing in a hall where the sound of 400 people applauding was reflecting off the cinder block walls. And he was the man who had just publicly questioned whether Chuck Norris had a right to be in the room. There are moments in a man's life where the thing he does next defines a very long stretch of what follows. Drummond stood there for a moment. And then he did something. He walked toward the mat. He did not walk quickly. He walked the way a man walks when he is doing something that is costing him something. He reached the edge of the mat. He stopped. He looked at the man in the white t-shirt, who was still standing where he had stopped, hands at his sides watching. Drummond said something. What he said exactly has been reported in at least 4 different ways over the years by people who were in a position to hear it. The version that Haruki Sato, who was closest, gave in a 1994 interview with a martial arts publication, aligns with what Ronald Kane told a journalist in 2003. Drummond said that he owed an apology. He said it without preamble and without qualification. What followed lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It was not a sparring match. It was not arranged. What it was a demonstration that Gerald Foss asked for on the spot, and that Chuck Norris agreed to without hesitation. Because Foss believed correctly that 400 people who had just witnessed that moment needed to understand what it meant. Foss asked 2 of the open division finalists to step onto the mat. Both were credentialed black belts. Both had won bouts that morning against serious competition. Both agreed. This is where you need to understand something about distance. A fight, when it is between 2 people who genuinely know what they are doing, is not an exchange of techniques. It is a negotiation about distance. Every serious martial artist understands this in theory. What is rare, genuinely rare, rarer than any number of titles or certifications can manufacture, is a man who does not merely understand distance as a concept, but who has internalized it so completely that his management of it is invisible. That is the thing that takes 30 years. Not the technique, the distance. Chuck Norris stood in the center of the mat. He had not stretched. He had not shadowboxed. He had not rolled his shoulders or adjusted his stance or made any of the preparatory gestures that trained fighters make, almost involuntarily, when they are about to move. He stood the way he had been standing all morning, hands at his sides, weight balanced without apparent intention, watching. The first man came forward at the 7-second mark. He was a regional champion from Oregon. He was 26 years old. He had a front kick that Haruki Sato had scored twice that morning as technically near perfect. He threw it. It did not land. It did not land, because at the moment it was launched, Chuck Norris was no longer where it was aimed. The movement that took him out of the kick's path was not dramatic. It was approximately 8 inches of lateral displacement, timed to the fraction of a second, and it made the front kick travel through empty air with a completeness that seemed, to the people watching, almost impossible given how little had moved. The man from Oregon reset. He looked at the space where the kick had gone. He reset. Patricia Reeves in the 3rd row had stopped writing on her clipboard. Her pen was still touching the paper, but nothing was being written. At 14 seconds, the first man tried again. This time a combination, a jab to draw the guard, a cross behind it, a round kick to the body. The jab found nothing. The cross found nothing. The round kick, which had ended bouts that morning with genuine force, was caught, not blocked. Caught. Chuck Norris held the leg at the ankle for 1 full second, at the height it had arrived, without movement, the way a man might hold a door open. He released it. He stepped back. He waited. At 19 seconds, the second man came in. He was a year older than the first. He was 2 inches taller. He had a back fist combination that the judges had awarded a perfect score to in the quarterfinal. He used it. He used all of it. The back fist moved at a speed that drew a sound from the gallery, a short involuntary intake that the crowd made and then was embarrassed to have made. It hit nothing. Ronald Chiang in the East Bleachers described this moment 17 years later in an interview. He said that what he saw was not evasion. He said that the word evasion implies reaction, implies that a man sees something coming and moves to avoid it. He said what he saw was something different, a man who was already not where he was going to be hit before the decision to hit him had fully formed. He said he did not have a technical vocabulary for it, and did not believe a technical vocabulary existed. At 23 seconds, both men moved together. This was not arranged. It was simply what happened, the natural convergence of 2 trained fighters who have each failed individually, and whose instinct is to try together. They came in from separate angles, a half-second apart, high and low. 3 things happened in a span of time that Gerald Foss, watching from the officials' table, estimated at 2 seconds and that Haruki Sato estimated at less. Chuck Norris moved left. His right hand extended toward the first man's guard, not a strike, a touch. The lightest possible contact at the forearm, enough to redirect 2 inches of forward momentum and produce a stumble that took the first man completely out of the action. In the same motion, his body turned 40 degrees. The low sweep from the second man traveled through the space his legs had occupied half a second before, and then he stopped. He was standing in a different position than he had been standing in. The 2 men were recovering their balance. He was not breathing noticeably harder than he had been before he moved. The hall was completely silent. At 31 seconds, the first man bowed. It was a formal bow, the kind given at the end of a match, not in the middle of a demonstration. It was not asked for and it was not expected, and it was entirely genuine. The second man looked at him, and then bowed as well. Chuck Norris looked at them both. He gave a bow that was identical in depth and duration to the ones he had received. He stepped back, to the edge of the mat. The hall began again with its sound. This time it was different from before. It was louder, and it contained something that applause does not normally contain, a quality of people trying to account for something they were not sure they had the language for. Gerald Foss was on his feet at the officials' table. Haruki Sato had his hands folded in his lap, and was looking at the mat with an expression that Patricia Reeves described. When asked about it many years later, as a man doing arithmetic he kept arriving at the same answer for. At the edge of the mat, Alistair Drummond had not moved since the demonstration began. He was standing where he had stopped, 11 seconds before Chuck Norris had first been addressed through the microphone. He had watched every second of it from 8 feet away. Chuck Norris stepped off the mat. He walked past Drummond. He stopped. He said 3 words. What the 3 words were, Drummond shared only once, in a conversation with Haruki Sato sometime in the early 1990s. A conversation that Sato recounted in partial detail in print. The words were quiet. They were not unkind. They contained no triumph and no instruction. They were the words of a man who had nothing left to say because everything that needed to be said had already been demonstrated, and who understood that the 3 words he chose were not a conclusion, but an offering. A way out for a man standing at a fork who had, in the end, chosen the harder and more honest road. Drummond nodded. That was all. Chuck Norris picked up his denim jacket from the back of the seat in the 4th row. He folded it over one arm. He picked up his paper cup from the floor. He walked to the side exit near the equipment tables. Gerald Foss walked with him as far as the door and placed one hand briefly on his shoulder before he went through. The side door closed. The hall for a moment did not move. Then Gerald Foss returned to the officials' table and announced that the open division would begin in 5 minutes. And the morning resumed. And the winds continued moving through the parking lot outside in slow, dry gusts.
Indifferent to what had just ended inside. What happened to the story after Chuck Norris left the building is the part that takes longest to trace, because it did not travel through any official record. It traveled the way things traveled in that world, in that era, through conversations in the corridors of other tournaments.
Through the particular oral culture of dojos, where the person telling the story had heard it from the person who was in the room, or from the person who had spoken to 3 people who were in the room, and where each retelling shed one detail and gained another until the specific texture of it became, in some versions, a different tournament, a different city, a different year. But the bones of it held. Ronald Keong told it in its most complete form, in 1996, to a martial arts historian named Thomas Viel, who was compiling records of the competitive era. Keong said that what he had witnessed was not a demonstration of fighting. He said that what he had witnessed was a demonstration of what happens when a man spends 30 years doing one thing with absolute seriousness. He said that the 2 men on the mat had been genuinely skilled. He said they had done everything correctly. He said that correctness had been, in that particular 4 minutes, completely beside the point. Patricia Reeves still has the clipboard from that morning. The entry she was writing when the first kick missed is still unfinished. She has never completed it. She said once that she keeps the clipboard because she wants to remember what it feels like to forget what you were doing, because you are watching something true. Alistair Drummond continued judging tournaments for 11 more years. He retired from officiating in 1990. In the conversation with Haruki Sato, the one in which he shared the 3 words, he said that the morning in Long Beach had changed the way he administered his own authority. He did not elaborate on what that meant. Sato did not press him. Some things are clear enough without elaboration. As for Chuck Norris, he never told the story. Not publicly, not that anyone has been able to find. There is no interview in which he mentions the Pacific Rim Championships of October 1979. There is no entry in any of his written accounts. The morning in Long Beach belongs entirely to the people who were in the room and to the rooms those people carried it into afterward. What the morning contained at its center was not a confrontation. Confrontations require 2 people who both intend one. What the morning contained was a question, asked through a microphone by a qualified and serious man who did not yet know what he was looking at, and an answer delivered without words, in 4 minutes and 11 seconds by a man who had spent 30 years learning how to let his understanding of a thing speak without his needing to raise his voice. The lesson is not about karate. The lesson is not even about Chuck Norris. The lesson is about the relationship between a man's credentials and his comprehension. Between the authority he holds and the knowledge that earns it. A certificate is a record of a past examination. It says nothing about what a man sees when he looks at the 4th row. What you see when you look, and what you understand about what you see, are 2 different instruments. Most men spend a lifetime confusing one for the other. Next week, we will be covering the evening in a Chicago hotel corridor in 1983, when a man with 2 world titles decided to find out in private what he had not been willing to ask in public, and what Chuck Norris told him before he walked away. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from tonight, and make certain you are subscribed so you do not miss it.